ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa's re-election seems to have boosted policy certainty in the country as he was re-elected, the party's leader, in December. That's according to the NWU Business School's Policy Uncertainty Index, or PUI, for the fourth quarter of 2022. We're now joined by Professor Raymond Parsons from the Northwest University to speak more on this. Prof, thank you very much for availing yourself.
Good afternoon to you.
And of course, so much has happened this week alone, right? So maybe let's start with news from NERSA yesterday approving Eskom's request for a tariff increase.
Well, let me start best by saying that you have referred to our Policy Uncertainty Index for the fourth quarter of last year, which ended on a note of less uncertainty, but it was still in uncertain territory. But as you rightly pointed out, perhaps one of the most important factors towards the end of that quarter was the re-election of our president as the president of the ANC. But the warning that was contained in that index still remained. We were in negative territory, and the next biggest single factor from a negative point of view was, of course, our inability to keep the lights on. And it was felt very much that was going to be perhaps not as much a source of uncertainty as it was in the fourth quarter, but that it would worsen in the first quarter of this year. So not for nothing, this is, of course, Friday the 13th. It's an unlucky day for all the Eskom consumers. So what the bottom line here is that whether you're a business or a consumer, you'll be paying much more for much less power. That's the bottom line. It's a very serious situation. It needs to be resolved in whatever way is possible. It's easy. Many people have had a lot to say about what should be done. I don't want to add to that unnecessarily. I think everyone agrees it's a very serious situation, and it will, of course, impact on uncertainty in the first quarter of this year if it's prolonged. So there's a lot riding on how we start this year and how we deal with issues such as all this load shedding, which is such a serious impact on the economy, and the fact that we have now got a double whammy. Not only isn't there power, but we're paying more for it. So those are twin factors that have started the year off on a very negative note.
Yeah, hopefully we can turn this Friday the 13th notion on its head, right? We are sitting on stage 6 load shedding, and you speak of the impact of uncertainty in the first quarter, or this will impact uncertainty in the first quarter. When we take a look at your Policy Uncertainty Index, what informs it, rather?
Well, it was created 5 or 6 years ago simply because, in a nutshell, we found that the issue of policy uncertainty was a constant in all the economic debate about South Africa, and it was necessary to find a way in which we could calibrate it. You know, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we looked around the world and found, in fact, there were other similar uncertainty indices in other parts of the world. So we drew in on that research, we adapted it to our circumstances, and we decided that there would be 3 main inputs. The first is, how many times in the media do the words policy uncertainty or political uncertainty occur? Secondly, we have a group of senior economists who fill in a brief questionnaire, how they read the tea leaves around uncertainty. And then thirdly, there's a figure that comes out of the Bureau for Economic Research at Stellenbosch University, which asks the manufacturing sector, how have they experienced political or policy uncertainty? The amalgam of that provides us with a net outcome. So in each quarter, whether it's the fourth quarter of last year or the earlier quarters, since we started the index in 1916 and will continue this year, it will then be what is the net outcome of the positive and the negative factors in that quarter. So it will shift. It's unfortunately, for most of the past few years, been in the negative territory. And what we need to do, if we want to get investment, want to create jobs, want people to be committed to the future of this country, we've got to get it closer to positive territory. And that is now the biggest single challenge that we are facing this year as well.
Sure, Prof. So you also note that business and the markets perceive the new ANC leadership as committed to expediting economic reform and implementing pro-growth policies and projects in 2023. How did we come to this conclusion? Is it clear to you, at least, following that policy conference, that when it comes to economic policies of the ANC, it is clear the path that they will take, especially given that the majority of the people in the country, their quality of lives still have not been improved?
Well, I think the important point to understand is if you focus on the ANC, it is the governing party. So what it decides, what it says, what impact it has is important for all of us, and we need to take it seriously. I think the issue that emerges from our index and also from the general debate, both from the ANC conference and what the President has said subsequently, that this year has to be a year of action, not talking. In fact, I like to say, if we could factor talking into our growth rate, we wouldn't have a problem. So the truth is that this year, we've got to take what we've committed ourselves to, which have, to some extent, has been outlined by the President, but there are other things that have to be done, such as emerge from our economic reconstruction and our recovery plan, which was decided a couple of years ago. That's got to be implemented. So the important message that's got to come out of the governing party and out of the government this year, it's got to say, we are going to take these issues by the scruff of the neck and push them into action. Well, and the immediate one is, of course, Eskom, because whatever else you promise to do, if you can't keep the lights on, it's not much good trying to do other things. So the important point now is what urgent steps must be taken in order to reassure investors, of course business, and the person in the street, that we can build confidence. It's in fact not even enough to reduce uncertainty. We need to ignite confidence. And for that, you need to come up with an urgent, bold way of taking what you've committed yourself to and making it happen in a visible way. That is what gives hope and confidence. There are no overnight solutions, but people must feel that something is being done to turn a situation around, that their condition will get better, not immediately overnight, but there are forces being unleashed that enable us to take a more benign and a positive view of how this year and the years thereafter will unfold for the man in the street, for the average person who either has a job and is worried about inflation, or doesn't have a job and wonders what are his prospects, his or her prospects in the future.
Sure. Prof, you did mention a little bit earlier on that we're literally paying for something that we do not have in terms of the availability of electricity in our households, at least. I mean, you had to trek all the way to our studios because your network doesn't work where you are when there's load shedding for hours on end. And so there's also that conversation that has highly divided society, where we do know of South Africa's plans of the just energy transition. We know that there's going to be a mix of, government and private interests, where we have independent power producers also introduced into the mix. However, the argument there also that has been made by some sectors of society is that that will not be affordable as well. I do wonder if you've maybe formulated an opinion on. You did mention, okay, yes, there are so many people who have said so many things, but when it comes to that, to privatize Eskom or to leave it as it is? I
think what we've got to do, we've got to distinguish between short-term measures, which are emergency measures to keep the lights on, and then the sort of medium and the longer-term measures which tie into what energy mix do you need and how are you going to finance it if you want a just transition to a greener economy. I think we all accept that the world is committed to that. But it's all been agreed that every country's circumstances are different. So how they do it, the pace at which they can do it, what are the trade-offs they can afford. And I think the important point is that's why the phrase a just transition has been evolved for all countries and for South Africa. I would only say, given our socio-economic circumstances, it had better be very just, because there are trade-offs. And so whatever our laudable goals on the climate change, they've got to fit in to other socio-economic objectives. As far as the immediate issue of Eskom is concerned, I would only say once again, one must be seen to be doing certain things, even if they take a couple of months. For example, we must get a new CEO at Eskom and fill those top vacancies quickly. We need the cabinet to be reshuffled in order to know who is going to be the political leader in the field of, in the field of energy. We've got to ask ourselves, should we be looking at, for example, daylight saving as an example? Because remember, it's a mixture. Every little bit now helps. Because really, of course, Eskom has its back to the wall. And then, of course, more immediately, although that's not an overnight issue, I think the formula on which NERSA has based its decision will have to be revisited, will have to be more flexible, because we're living in a very changed world. So I think that NERSA did what it had to do technically, given the inputs it had, but it's quite clear that that formula is no longer adequate. And so we need, in the next few months, to insist that that formula must also be of course, revisited. But the general point is we must be able to tell the public we're doing something in the short term to help keep the lights on or to minimize the load shedding, which is not going to go away soon. And on the other hand, longer term steps and implementation, not only in the field of energy, as important as that is, but in other areas of commitment that will send out a message that South Africa is open for business. That's why we've gone to Davos. But we will do all the right things to earn that right and that credibility to be a preferred investment destination which is intending to grow and expand. And that's what you really want to be able to send out, because you want to be able to say, we are going to tackle these problems, but we're going to tackle them in a visible, active way, together with the private sector, and we're going to set timelines. Don't just use the words urgent or set timelines. Things will be done by a certain date, and there will be consequences at all levels if those deadlines are not met.
Going beyond the talk, as you said. Thank you very much, Northwest University Business School Professor Raymond Parsons. Thank you.